It began on a night that was supposed to be ordinary, a small family gathering in the quiet outskirts of Lexington, Kentucky. Laughter, music, and the smell of grilled food filled the air as relatives shared stories around the patio lights. By midnight, most of the guests had gone home, leaving behind empty bottles, faint laughter, and a calm that settled over the suburban neighborhood. Inside the house, the Bennett family seemed, at least on the surface, content. But beneath that calm was a current of tension that had been building for years. John Bennett, 52, was a construction foreman, a steady, hard-working man who'd spent decades trying to hold together his blended family. His wife, Carol, 48, was a nurse with a warm smile that hid a lifetime of worry. Between them, they had 3 children: Megan, 17, a quiet high school senior who sang in the church choir; Luke, 23, Carol's son from a previous marriage; and Adam, 26, John's son from his first marriage. Adam had always been a source of unease. Brilliant when sober, unpredictable when not, he had battled untreated mental illness since his late teens. There had been outbursts, violent arguments, and long stretches of estrangement. John had tried again and again to help him, counseling, medication, even time in rehab, but nothing seemed to hold. Still, family ties ran deep. So when Adam called that evening, asking if he could stay over after the party, John hesitated only a moment before saying yes. Just one night, Carol murmured to her husband as they tidied up the kitchen. "He's been better lately." John gave a tired nod. "Let's hope so." By 1:30 a.m., the house was quiet. Megan was asleep upstairs, her Bible still open beside her. Carol had gone to bed, while John stayed up watching the late news. Adam sat alone in the dimly lit living room, a half-empty beer on the table beside him. His eyes were distant, his mind circling dark thoughts he hadn't shared with anyone. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. The house creaked softly. Sometime before dawn, everything changed. Neighbors later reported hearing a single gunshot, then another, then silence. Inside, horror unfolded room by room. By sunrise, 3 members of the Bennett family would be dead: John, Carol, and Luke. Each attacked while they slept. 2 shot at close range. 1 bludgeoned. Carol, investigators would later determine, had suffered unspeakable desecration after death. The only survivor inside the house that morning was Megan. Just after 7 a.m., she rose quietly, getting ready for Sunday service. The house felt unusually still. She passed her brother's room, the door slightly ajar, and thought she heard movement. Adam stepped out, his face pale, his voice low. "Morning," he said. Something in his tone made her pause. His eyes didn't meet hers. "Morning," she whispered back. That was the last she saw of him. Minutes later, she left for church, unaware that behind her, the walls of her family home were steeped in tragedy. The sanctuary was already filling when Megan Bennett arrived that Sunday morning. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, painting soft hues of blue and gold across the pews. She took her usual seat near the back, her hymnbook clutched tightly. To anyone watching, she looked calm, perhaps a little tired, but nothing about her demeanor hinted that, only hours earlier, she had unknowingly walked through a crime scene. Midway through the service, she couldn't shake a strange heaviness in her chest. Her phone buzzed repeatedly in her purse, but she ignored it, out of habit. When the final prayer ended, she glanced at the screen: 5 missed calls from a neighbor, Mrs. Clayton, and 1 from an unknown number. Her pulse quickened. Something felt wrong. When she stepped outside into the cool autumn air, she saw flashing red and blue lights far down her street. The sight made her stomach drop. She broke into a run, gravel crunching beneath her shoes as she neared her house. The closer she got, the clearer it became: squad cars, yellow tape, and uniformed officers filled her front yard. "Megan Bennett?" a voice called. She stopped at the gate, her chest heaving. "That's me, what's going on?" The officer's eyes softened, but his voice was steady. You can't go inside. There's been an incident. Megan's mind refused to process the words. My parents, my brothers, are they okay? The silence that followed was unbearable. Detective Carla Monroe, the lead investigator, stepped forward. A seasoned detective with calm gray eyes, she spoke gently. Megan, I need you to come with me. We'll talk somewhere quiet. Minutes later, inside a neighbor's living room, Megan sat trembling as Detective Monroe explained the unthinkable. 3 of her family members, her father, stepmother, and brother Luke, had been found dead in their beds. There were signs of forced entry in Luke's room and blood spatter indicating multiple weapons had been used. Was Adam there? Megan whispered. Monroe hesitated. We're still looking for him. Outside, the coroner's van idled near the curb. Reporters were already gathering, murmuring about what they called the Bennett House massacre. Inside the house, crime scene technicians moved carefully through each room. John and Carol were found in their bedroom, shot at close range as they slept. Luke's body lay half out of bed, his head bearing the marks of a blunt object. The violence was intimate, deliberate, and cold. And the worst revelation came later that afternoon, when the forensic pathologist discovered evidence that Carol had been violated after death, a finding that left even veteran investigators shaken. Detective Monroe studied the photos spread across the table at the command post, her jaw tight. This wasn't random, she said quietly. This was rage, personal, targeted. One of the officers, Sergeant Dean Wallace, nodded grimly. Adam Bennett's been in and out of trouble for years. Assault charges, threats, psychiatric holds, last one just 6 months ago. Was he on medication? Monroe asked. Supposed to be. But according to his file, he stopped taking it months ago. Monroe stared at the family photo taken just last Christmas, smiling faces around a tree, unaware of what was coming. Find him, she said. Before he hurts anyone else. By sundown, an all-points bulletin went out across Kentucky. Police searched abandoned motels, parks, and backroads. Megan was moved into protective custody, sitting in stunned silence as officers packed her a small overnight bag. Through her tears, she whispered one question over and over. Why would he do this? No one could answer her. But by the next morning, they would have their first clue. Dawn broke cold and gray over Lexington the following morning. A thin mist clung to the fields as police cruisers lined the 2-lane road leading out of town. The Bennett home was sealed off, yellow tape fluttering in the wind like torn ribbons of warning. Inside the command tent, Detective Carla Monroe reviewed the overnight reports. There was still no sign of Adam Bennett. At 8:12 a.m. A gas station attendant 20 miles north called in a sighting. A man matching Adam's description, disheveled, wearing a flannel shirt stained with something dark, had stopped for cigarettes and a bottle of water. He paid in cash, avoided eye contact, and drove off in John Bennett's old Ford pickup. The truck's license plate matched perfectly. Headed north toward the hills, Sergeant Wallace muttered, tracing the route on a map. He's going to the family cabin. Everyone in the room knew what that meant. The Bennetts owned a small cabin in the woods near Red River Gorge, a place John used to take the kids fishing when they were little. It was remote, surrounded by dense pine and oak, and barely accessible by dirt road. Monroe grabbed her coat. We're not letting him hole up there. The drive through the back roads was silent except for the hum of tires on gravel. As they neared the cabin, the woods thickened, the morning light fading into a dim green haze. Birds scattered from the treetops as the convoy approached. Half a mile from the property, a deputy raised his hand. Truck spotted. The Ford sat at an angle beside the cabin, engine still warm. The driver's door hung open. Inside the vehicle, officers found a half-empty bottle of whiskey, a box of ammunition, and a bloodied blanket. Monroe signaled for silence. "He's close." The team moved in, weapons drawn, boots crunching against wet leaves. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of rain and pine. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, echoing through the trees. Then, from inside the cabin, a sound, faint but unmistakable. A creak of a floorboard. "Police!" Monroe shouted. "Adam Bennett, come out with your hands up." No response. They breached the door. The cabin was small, one main room, a kitchenette, and a narrow hallway leading to a bedroom. The place was dim, lit only by the pale morning light filtering through grimy windows. On the table sat a revolver and an open Bible, the pages smeared with fingerprints. A shadow moved near the back. "Don't shoot," a voice rasped. Adam stepped into view, his clothes torn, his face gaunt and streaked with dirt. His eyes were hollow, almost vacant. He raised his hands slowly. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he muttered. "It just got out of control." "Drop to your knees," Monroe ordered. He obeyed, shaking uncontrollably as cuffs clicked around his wrists. Officers led him outside, his head bowed, his bare feet dragging across the mud. For a moment, the forest was silent again, the kind of silence that comes after violence ends, but before the truth begins. Back at headquarters, Adam was booked and placed in an interrogation room. The small, sterile space smelled of coffee and bleach. His fingers twitched on the table, his eyes darting toward the one-way mirror. Detective Monroe entered with a folder in hand. "Adam," she began quietly, "3 people are dead. Your father. Your stepmother. Your brother. We found your fingerprints on the gun and your blood on the blanket in your father's truck. Help me understand what happened." For a long moment, Adam said nothing. Then, almost whispering, he spoke. "They were laughing at me," he said. "All of them. Acting like I didn't belong there. But I do. It's my house too." His voice cracked. "She tried to make me take those pills again. Said I needed them. Said I was sick. But I'm not sick. They were the ones who wanted to keep me quiet." Monroe studied him carefully. "You mean Carol?" He nodded. "She always thought she was better than my mom. She took everything, my dad, my home, my life. But she can't take it anymore." He smiled faintly, a chilling, hollow smile. Monroe's stomach turned. The motive was clearer now: resentment, untreated delusion, and years of buried anger that had finally erupted into unimaginable violence. When she left the room, Sergeant Wallace met her outside. "What do you think?" She exhaled slowly. "He's not just unstable. He's dangerous, and he knew exactly what he was doing." By nightfall, Adam Bennett was charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder. The press swarmed the station, cameras flashing, microphones reaching through the crowd. As Adam was led to a waiting van, he glanced up at the sky, the faintest smirk on his lips. It was the same cold, distant look his father had once described in him, the look of a man who believed he had nothing left to lose. The days following Adam Bennett's arrest felt surreal for the Lexington community. What had begun as a family tragedy was now front-page news. Headlines called it the Bennett family massacre, while neighbors, still stunned, struggled to comprehend how a man they'd seen mowing the lawn or waving from the porch could be capable of such horror. Detective Carla Monroe barely slept. Her office at the Lexington Police Department became a maze of photographs, evidence bags, and timelines. She studied everything: crime scene photos, forensic reports, autopsy notes, searching for clarity in the chaos. The lab results arrived first. Gunshot residue was found on Adam's hands and sleeves. His fingerprints were on the revolver used to kill John and Carol, and the blunt object, a heavy brass candlestick, that had taken Luke's life also bore his DNA. But it was the forensic report on Carol that truly broke the room's silence. Monroe read it once, then again, unable to hide her disgust. There were clear signs of post-mortem assault. It wasn't just rage, it was degradation, humiliation. This wasn't spontaneous, Sergeant Wallace muttered, leaning over her shoulder. He wanted to destroy them, even after death. Monroe nodded grimly. This was about control. About revenge. She turned to a stack of reports detailing Adam's background. His mental health history read like a timeline of warnings ignored. Years of erratic behavior, violent outbursts, and temporary hospitalizations. Diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder at 19. Non-compliance with medication. Court-ordered therapy he never attended. His dad tried, Wallace said quietly. You can see the pattern, every time Adam relapsed, John let him back in. Believed he could fix him. Monroe rubbed her temples. And this time, that kindness cost them everything. While detectives pieced together the evidence, Megan Bennett remained under police protection. The trauma had left her silent for days, her eyes hollow. When Monroe visited her at the safe house, the girl sat curled on the couch, clutching a framed photo of her family. He wasn't always like that, Megan said softly. When I was little, Adam used to build forts with me. He'd sneak me candy after bedtime. But when he stopped taking his medicine, it was like someone else moved into his body. Monroe listened, taking careful notes. Did your father ever mention being afraid of him? Megan nodded. He didn't say it out loud, but, yes. I think he was scared. There was this night, maybe 2 weeks ago. I woke up to shouting. Dad was telling Adam to leave. Adam said something like, "You'll regret this, old man." The next day, he was gone. That threat became a crucial piece of evidence. Monroe logged it in her report, proof of premeditation. Meanwhile, the forensic technicians found something chilling inside the cabin where Adam had been arrested. Hidden under a loose floorboard was a small spiral notebook, his handwriting scrawled across the pages. The entries were fragmented, erratic, a blend of anger, confusion, and delusion. She poisoned him against me. They whisper in the walls. The pills make me weak, I see clearer without them. The house is mine again now. It's quiet. Peaceful. Monroe closed the notebook slowly. He planned this, she said. Maybe not down to the minute, but he knew exactly what he was going to do. Further evidence tied everything together, gunpowder residue on the truck seat, blood matching Luke's DNA on Adam's shoes, and fragments of Carol's wedding ring embedded in the candlestick. By the end of the week, prosecutors filed 3 counts of aggravated murder, 1 count of desecration of remains, and unlawful possession of a firearm. Adam's record prohibited him from owning one. The district attorney, Glenn Marshall, held a press conference on the courthouse steps. Cameras clicked as he spoke. This was an act of calculated brutality, he said firmly. Justice will be pursued to the fullest extent of the law. Behind him, Detective Monroe stood motionless, hands clasped. She wasn't thinking about the cameras or the headlines, only about Megan. The quiet, broken girl who had lost everything. When reporters shouted questions about the motive, Monroe finally spoke. Sometimes, she said softly, the motive is heartbreakingly simple. Years of resentment. A mind that turned against itself. And a family that loved him enough to let him back in, one last time. That night, as the police station emptied, Monroe sat alone reviewing the case file. Outside, the rain began to fall, tapping against the windows. The evidence was overwhelming, the narrative clear, yet something about Adam's last words in the interrogation room lingered in her mind. They were laughing at me. She wondered if, in that fractured mind, the laughter had ever been real. But by now, the truth didn't matter. 3 lives were gone, and the man responsible sat in a jail cell, humming softly to himself, as if the silence he'd created was finally enough. Adam Bennett sat alone in his cell at the Fayette County Detention Center, his body still, his eyes unfocused. The pale fluorescent light flickered above him, reflecting off the concrete walls. He hadn't spoken since the night of his arrest, except for short, incoherent phrases, fragments of thought that made little sense to anyone listening. But one thing was clear: he wasn't ready to face what he had done. Detective Carla Monroe watched through the observation window as a court-appointed psychiatrist, Dr. Alan Weiss, entered the room. The evaluation had been ordered to determine whether Adam was competent to stand trial. Weiss, a calm man in his 60s, sat across from him with a small notepad and a steady gaze. "Adam," he began softly, "do you understand why you're here?" Adam tilted his head. "They said I broke the house." "Broke the house?" He nodded slowly. "It was full of noise. Voices. Laughing at me. But it's quiet now." Weiss scribbled something down. "Do you remember what happened to your family?" Adam's brow furrowed. "They were sick. She made them sick. The pills, they were poison." "Who made them sick?" "Carol," he whispered, his voice trembling. "She wanted to take Dad away from me. She wanted to control everything." Weiss leaned back. His training told him what he was hearing: paranoid delusions, possibly auditory hallucinations, consistent with schizoaffective disorder. But there was something else too, a layer of bitterness that had nothing to do with illness, a hatred that had been nurtured over years of perceived rejection. "Did you plan to hurt them, Adam?" For the first time, Adam's eyes met his. "I planned to make it stop." Later that afternoon, Monroe met with Weiss in a small conference room at the courthouse. Rain lashed against the windows, and the scent of old coffee lingered in the air. "He's detached," Weiss said, closing his notebook. "He knows what he's done, but he doesn't grasp the moral weight of it. In his mind, it was a form of cleansing, silencing what he believed were threats." Monroe crossed her arms. "So he's insane?" "Not in the legal sense," Weiss replied. "He's mentally ill, yes. But he still understood the nature and consequences of his actions. He loaded a weapon, targeted specific victims, and fled afterward. That shows awareness, planning." Monroe nodded grimly. "Meaning he's fit to stand trial." In the weeks that followed, the case moved through the legal system with methodical precision. The prosecution gathered more evidence: Adam's DNA on the gun trigger, residue on his hands, and a digital search history that included phrases like "how to silence voices" and "kill or be killed schizophrenia." The defense, led by public attorney Sharon Doyle, argued that Adam's untreated illness had clouded his judgment. She filed a motion for a competency hearing, insisting that her client needed psychiatric treatment before facing trial. The hearing took place in a packed courtroom. The Bennett's extended relatives filled the benches, their faces drawn with grief. Megan sat in the front row, clutching her aunt's hand, refusing to look at her brother as deputies escorted him in. Adam appeared thinner, paler than before, his wrists shackled. When the judge asked if he understood the charges, he replied softly, "Yes, sir. I do." Weiss took the stand and delivered his findings clearly. "While Mr. Bennett suffers from a severe mental disorder," he said, "he remains aware of right and wrong. He is competent to stand trial." The courtroom fell silent. Megan exhaled shakily, her eyes filling with tears. For a moment, Adam turned toward her, his expression blank, almost childlike. He mouthed something she couldn't quite read. Then the deputies led him away. Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed as the district attorney, Glenn Marshall, made his statement. "This is a tragedy rooted in neglect, both of mental health and of boundaries," he said. "But the law must still hold. We will pursue justice for John, Carol, and Luke Bennett." Detective Monroe watched from a distance, her coat pulled tight against the wind. She felt no satisfaction in the progress of the case, only a dull ache. She had seen many families destroyed by violence, but few that carried this kind of quiet sadness. That night, she visited Megan at the safe house again. The girl sat by the window, staring at the rain. "Do you think he knows what he did?" Megan asked, her voice barely audible. Monroe hesitated. "I think, in his mind, he believed he was doing something necessary." Megan's voice broke. "Then what does that make me? The one he spared?" Monroe didn't answer. There was no answer that could ease that kind of pain. As she left, she glanced back once. Megan sat motionless, framed by the faint glow of the porch light, the last living remnant of a family that had once seemed unbreakable. And somewhere in a cell across town, Adam Bennett stared at the ceiling, humming the same tune he'd hummed as a child when he couldn't sleep, a lullaby that, to him, meant peace. For the rest of the world, it meant something far darker. The trial of the state of Kentucky versus Adam Bennett began 8 months after the murders, in the spring of 2024. The courthouse in downtown Lexington was packed with reporters, community members, and grieving relatives. Everyone wanted to glimpse the man whose name had become synonymous with tragedy. Adam sat between his attorneys, wearing a plain gray suit that hung loosely on his frame. His face was pale, his hair cropped short. His eyes wandered the room, vacant, detached, as though he were watching someone else's story unfold. Across the aisle, Megan sat with her aunt and uncle, her expression a careful mask. She hadn't spoken to her brother since his arrest. The last memory she carried of him was that quiet morning he'd whispered before she left for church, a farewell she would replay in her mind for the rest of her life. The prosecutor, Glenn Marshall, opened the case with deliberate, measured words. "Ladies and gentlemen, this was not an act of madness. It was an act of choice." Adam Bennett was angry, resentful, and aware. And when he was finally invited back into his family's home, a home filled with love, forgiveness, and hope, he turned that kindness into cruelty. He described the events of that October night in haunting detail. The forensic evidence, the trajectory of the bullets, the sequence of attacks. Each slide projected behind him told a silent, terrible story, where John had been shot, how Carol had been assaulted, how Luke had fought to rise from bed before the blow struck him down. In the courtroom, you could hear a pin drop. When the defense rose, Public Attorney Sharon Doyle approached the jury with calm empathy. "My client, Adam Bennett, is a man broken by untreated illness, a man abandoned by a system that failed him long before this tragedy occurred. He did not choose delusion. He did not choose to be consumed by voices and paranoia. What happened in that home was the result of an untreated mind, not an evil one." She did not ask for mercy, only understanding. Over the next week, the jury heard testimony from psychiatrists, neighbors, and forensic experts. Detective Carla Monroe took the stand and spoke with the steady composure she'd learned from years in the field. "Was this a crime of passion, detective?" the defense asked. "No," Monroe replied. "This was premeditated. He brought the gun. He knew who he was targeting." The prosecution presented the notebook recovered from the cabin. The pages filled with Adam's angry scrawl, his paranoid delusions about poison, about laughter in the walls. When shown to the jury, the writings caused visible discomfort, a glimpse into the chaos that had replaced reason. Dr. Alan Weiss testified next, explaining the fine line between illness and accountability. "He suffers from a disorder, yes," Weiss said. "But he understood what he was doing. He fled, hid evidence, and expressed awareness that it was wrong. That awareness, in legal terms, defines competence." The courtroom murmured. Megan looked down, tears streaking her face. She had wanted to believe he was lost to madness, not to choice. When Adam himself took the stand, a hush fell over the room. His voice was low, monotone, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. "I loved my dad," he said softly. But he stopped listening. Carol made him weak. Luke laughed at me. They wanted to take everything. I just wanted them to stop. He paused, then added, it wasn't supposed to be like that. I just wanted silence. Silence, the prosecutor pressed. Adam nodded. The house was too loud. Those words, simple, eerie, became the headline the next morning. Adam Bennett, I just wanted silence. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their decision. On the morning of May 6, 2024, the courtroom was filled to capacity. Reporters lined the aisles, pens poised, cameras ready. The judge asked Adam to rise. On the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree, guilty. On the second count of aggravated murder, guilty. On the third count of aggravated murder, guilty. On the charge of desecration of remains, guilty. Adam stood motionless, showing no emotion. Megan broke down, sobbing quietly into her aunt's shoulder. The death penalty had been on the table, until, at the last moment, the defense negotiated a plea agreement. In exchange for waiving further appeals and accepting full responsibility, Adam Bennett would be spared execution. The sentence, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As the deputies led him away, Adam turned once toward the gallery. His gaze found Megan's. For a heartbeat, the years between them seemed to collapse, brother and sister, once close, now separated by unimaginable loss. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. The door closed behind him, and with it, the last trace of the Bennett family as it had once been, whole, imperfect, and alive. Detective Monroe watched the scene unfold from the back row. Justice had been served, but there was no victory in it, only the quiet weight of knowing that every life touched by this case had been forever altered. Outside, a cold rain began to fall, washing the courthouse steps clean. Yet for those who had lived through that horror, nothing would ever truly be washed away. In the months following the verdict, Lexington slowly returned to its quiet rhythm, but the Bennett house on Hawthorne Drive stood as a hollow reminder of what had been lost. The yard grew wild, the windows remained dark, and the neighbors crossed the street rather than walk past it. To them, it wasn't a home anymore, it was a ghost. Megan Bennett, now 18, moved in with her mother's sister in Louisville. She changed schools, stayed out of the spotlight, and rarely spoke of her family. The trauma had carved deep lines of silence into her life. Nightmares still visited her. Sometimes she saw Adam standing in the hallway, sometimes she heard the echo of that last morning he'd said before she left for church. But each dawn she woke up breathing, reminding herself she was still here. She began therapy, at first barely speaking, then slowly opening up. One day, her therapist asked her what she missed most about the life she had before. Megan hesitated before replying, noise. The kind that comes from people who love each other. Laughter. Music. The sound of doors closing and opening again. For her, silence had become the cruelest sound of all. Detective Carla Monroe couldn't let the case go either. Even after the sentencing, she found herself replaying it in her mind, not because of the violence, but because of everything that might have prevented it. She read through the psychiatric evaluations again, reports showing Adam had been flagged as high-risk years earlier, records of missed appointments, prescriptions left unfilled. Every line was a missed opportunity. She thought about John Bennett's final act of kindness, letting his son stay the night, and how that compassion had become his undoing. At her desk, Monroe wrote a memo to the department, urging the creation of a new liaison program between law enforcement and mental health services. "We can't stop every tragedy," she wrote, "but we can stop pretending we never saw it coming." Her words would later be quoted in a statewide proposal for improved crisis intervention, though she never sought credit for it. Adam Bennett was transferred to the Kentucky State Penitentiary, a gray fortress overlooking the Ohio River. Inmates called it the Castle, though nothing about it was regal. In his first weeks there, he spent most of his time in isolation, under psychiatric supervision. Prison staff reported that he rarely spoke. When he did, it was only to ask for a Bible, which he kept by his cot. He didn't write anymore, didn't hum his childhood songs. One guard later said, he just stares at the wall. Like he's waiting for it to answer. Dr. Alan Weiss visited twice, as part of a post-sentencing evaluation. The sessions were brief, silent. When Weiss asked him if he thought about his family, Adam simply said, "They're quiet now." 2 years passed. By then, the Bennett case had become part of true crime documentaries and podcasts, analyzed, dissected, sensationalized. But for those who had lived through it, it wasn't a story. It was a wound. On a gray afternoon in October 2025, Megan returned to Lexington for the first time since the murders. The house was being auctioned off, and she wanted one last look. The air was damp with rain as she walked through the doorway. The floors creaked just as they always had. The scent of dust and pine cleaner lingered. She paused at the living room, where family photos still hung slightly crooked on the wall, a frozen gallery of smiles that no longer existed. She knelt by the fireplace, where her father used to read the Sunday paper, and whispered, "I forgive you." It wasn't for Adam. It was for herself, for the years she'd spent trapped between grief and guilt, wondering why she had been spared. When she left, she didn't look back. The front door clicked shut softly, like an exhale. That winter, Detective Monroe received a handwritten letter at the station. It was from Megan. "You once told me that kindness can't fix everyone. You were right. But it still matters. Thank you for treating us like people, not headlines." Monroe folded the letter and placed it in her drawer beside the case file, now sealed and marked closed. In the end, the Bennett tragedy became more than just a tale of violence. It was a mirror held up to a family, a community, a system that had missed every warning sign until it was too late. Life went on, as it always does. The seasons turned, new families moved into new homes, and laughter once again echoed through Lexington's quiet streets. But for those who remembered, the name Bennett was a lesson, that love without boundaries can sometimes turn deadly, and that silence, when ignored, can be the loudest cry for help. The Bennett family's story is not only one of loss, but of the fragile line between mercy and danger, a line that can blur in the name of love. And in the echo of that silence, we are reminded that sometimes, the greatest kindness is the courage to say no.